8 years in uniform had hardened Silas's hands, but nothing prepared him for the sight that froze his breath: a wrecked car bleeding smoke on a mountain road, and two little girls in pink dresses clutching his loyal German shepherd, Valor. Their trembling wrists bore a birthmark shaped like a bird's wing, the very mark his family carried, the very mark he thought had died with the woman he loved. In that instant, war was no longer behind him. It was in front of him, written on the skin of children who might be his own. Would he have the courage to face a truth buried for 8 long years? The late afternoon light stretched long, pale fingers across the ridges of the Cascade Mountains as Silas drove his battered Jeep along the winding forest road. The air smelled of pine resin and damp earth, a mixture so sharp it almost cleansed the exhaustion from his chest. After 8 years of service in the army, 8 years of desert winds, grit in his teeth, and nights punctuated by distant gunfire, this silence felt alien. He had left the base only 2 days earlier, his duffel tossed in the back like a piece of his past that refused to settle. His body still carried the stiffness of discipline, but his soul craved rest. Beside him, stretched across the worn passenger seat, lay Valor, his German shepherd. At 5 years old, Valor was a magnificent creature, broad-shouldered, black and tan fur, shining even in the weak light. His amber eyes carried a strange intelligence, the sort that unnerved strangers but gave Silas comfort. They had met during Silas's 3rd year of service when the army had introduced canine units. Valor had been restless then, too sharp, too fierce for easy handlers. But Silas, patient and weary from battles of his own, had earned the dog's trust. Since then, they had been inseparable. Valor had once saved Silas from a collapsing wall during a raid. The scar along Silas's forearm was both his reminder and his proof of their bond. Now, with no battlefield left, Valor was not just his partner, he was his anchor to sanity. The forest outside was vast, an ocean of old-growth evergreens that loomed high and blotted out most of the sky. The hum of tires over gravel was the only sound, steady and hypnotic, almost lulling him into a trance. He adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, the leather worn smooth from years of use. In the glove box was a medal folded inside an old handkerchief. In his duffel, crumpled clothes and a single keepsake, a letter. The letter had been written 8 years earlier to Lana Marlowe, the woman who had once filled his world with warmth. Her laugh had been like glass chimes in the wind, fragile but unforgettable. She had been the only person to see through his guarded nature before the army hardened him further. When she told him about her illness, he had been helpless, swallowed by deployments and orders he could not refuse. He had written the letter in a desert outpost under a flickering lantern, his handwriting uneven, pressed down hard as if he could crush his own guilt into the page. He never sent it. Somehow it had followed him across continents, surviving sand, rain, and endless relocations. He carried it now not as hope but as penance, a reminder of words left unsaid. As the Jeep turned around a sharp bend, the forest deepened, shadows pooling beneath the trees like ink. Silas exhaled slowly. The road was slick from a recent drizzle, patches of damp earth glittering faintly. He reached down absently, brushing Valor's fur. The dog's ears twitched. Something in the air shifted, an unease that Valor sensed before Silas could name it. Then it happened. A blur of gray shot across the road, too fast, too close. Instinct, honed by years of combat, made Silas jerk the wheel hard right. The Jeep skidded, gravel spraying, tires screaming. For one terrible heartbeat, he saw nothing but forest spinning outside the windshield. The vehicle tipped, slammed against the embankment, and rolled halfway down the slope before crashing into a thicket of firs. Silas's head struck the window. The world blurred into fragments of sound-shattering glass. The groan of metal, the low growl of Valor thrown forward against the seatbelt harness. Then silence, thick and heavy. When he came to, the acrid scent of leaking gasoline stung his nose. His chest was pinned against the steering wheel, his left leg trapped under twisted metal. Pain radiated up his spine, hot and merciless. He tried shifting, but agony lanced through his body, forcing a gasp from his throat. The windshield was fractured into a spider's web of cracks. The outside world split into jagged shards. Valor whined beside him, shaking off the shock. The dog pressed against the broken console, nudging Silas's shoulder with his nose. His eyes were wide, urgent, as if demanding that Silas not give in. Silas lifted a trembling hand, brushing Valor's fur. "Easy, boy. We've been through worse," he rasped, though the words tasted like lies. Minutes dragged into something shapeless. Silas's vision wavered, thoughts swimming. He almost surrendered to the dark pull when he heard it. Light footsteps crunching over the slope, hesitant but determined. A voice small and breathless. "Mister, are you okay?" Through the cracked glass, two figures appeared. Twin girls no older than 8 stood side by side. Their dresses were pink, faded at the hems but clean, as if someone had tried to preserve at least a trace of innocence. Their faces were smudged with dirt, their hair chestnut brown, tangled from running through underbrush. One girl's hazel eyes widened with fear as she pressed her hand against the window, while the other clutched Valor's neck, burying her face in the dog's thick fur for courage. Silas tried to speak, but only a broken whisper escaped. The first twin tugged at the door handle, straining with all her might. When it didn't budge, she clenched her jaw, tears springing to her eyes. "Don't move. I'll get help," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. She darted off into the trees with surprising speed. The second girl lingered, her small hand still gripping Valor's fur. She glanced at Silas, frightened but unwilling to leave. Valor pressed against her gently, his protective instinct flaring. Silas, even in his haze, felt something strange coil in his chest. The way the girl leaned on his dog was not just desperation, it was trust, pure and unspoken. Then he saw it. As the fading light filtered through the broken window, it caught the girl's wrist. There, clear against her pale skin, was a faint purplish mark in the shape of a bird's wing. His breath hitched. That mark. The same one his mother had. The same one his sister bore. The same one he had always thought of as a peculiar family crest. His heart pounded, louder than the pain, louder than reason. Two girls, 8 years old. Born during the exact span of his service. His eyes widened in disbelief. The girl pulled back slightly, hugging Valor tighter as if sensing his fear. "Please, don't close your eyes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Then she too slipped into the forest, chasing after her sister. Alone again, Silas slumped against the seat. He looked down at his lap, at the duffel that had slid open in the crash. The corner of the old envelope jutted out, yellowed and fragile. He reached for it, fingers brushing the name scrawled at the top. Lana Marlowe. The pain in his body dimmed beneath the greater ache rising in his chest. He whispered her name, a sound broken and hoarse, then let his head rest back against the seat. Somewhere in the forest, Valor barked sharply, as if to anchor him to life. And just before the dark claimed him again, Silas realized the cruel symmetry. He had been gone for 8 years, and somewhere in the silence of those same years, 2 daughters, his daughters, had grown up without him. He surfaced from darkness to the pulse of rain on tin and the sting of antiseptic in his throat. A fan clicked in a slow, tired circle overhead, slicing the light into quiet pieces that drifted across the whitewashed walls. Silas lay on a narrow cot, bandaged at the ribs and thigh, with the ache of metal still ghosting his bones. Valor lay on a wool mat at the foot of the cot, head up, ears pricked, his whole body set like a compass needle toward the door. The clinic was the kind that existed more from stubbornness than funding. 2 rooms, a row of dented cabinets, and a handwritten sign that read, "Please knock some things, here still heal." A woman entered carrying a metal tray, and the air shifted with her presence. Nurse Nora Bell, 38, small and sturdy, had ash blonde hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun and eyes the gray-blue of Oregon rain. The tiny lines at their corners spoke of long nights and too many promises to too many families. She had grown up in logging country, lost a brother to a mill accident at 16, and had learned the hard math of caretaking. Show up, do right, forgive the ones who don't. "You're awake," she said, voice firm but gentle. "Lucky man, unlucky guardian angel." She nodded toward Valor. "Dog wouldn't leave your side. Tried to hurt us like we were sheep when we moved you off that stretcher." Silas swallowed, the edges of memory returning in splinters, jutting glass, fir needles, pink fabric, small hands. The girls, he rasped, two of them, in pink dresses, Nora's brow knit. A couple of locals brought you in retired logger named Hank Lowell and his grandson. Said a child ran to the road and waved them down. By the time they got you loose, she'd vanished back into the trees. She set the tray down and checked his pupils with a penlight. No one's claimed them. Nobody's come asking. Valor rose, padded to the door, and let out a low, steady huff, as if reminding the room that absence is also evidence. Silas swung his legs over the cot, pain knifing and then receding to a throb. Nora put a hand to his shoulder but didn't press. She could read the particular urgency of a man who had measured his life in missions and after-action reports, who now suspected the mission was his own blood. You shouldn't be walking, she warned, but I won't stop you. I've learned the difference between healing and hiding. She handed him a folded map, dog-eared at the corners. The truck dropped you near Larchwood Ridge. Only houses out that way are scattered. If there are twins in pink dresses, someone nearby buys a lot of stain remover. The attempt at humor landed softly, a small light in a dark hall. She opened the door. Valor pressed against Silas's knee, a steadying weight as they stepped into the wet afternoon. Outside the clinic, the town sat like a stubborn knot at the edge of the Forest 2 gas pumps, a coffee kiosk that had once been a horse trailer, a feed store with a carved wooden elk over the door. Across the road, Hank Lowell, a big-shouldered man in his 70s with a beard like winter moss, and the wide-knuckled hands of a life spent lifting the unliftable, leaned against a battered Ford. His grandson Tyler, 14, freckled and lanky with a jaw set in the permanent half-defiance of boyhood, stood beside him, eyes bright with the adrenaline of having done something that mattered. Hank tipped his cap. "You owe that little one your life," he said without ceremony. She moved like she'd been chased her whole life and had finally decided to chase back. Tyler, trying to ground his own shaking, added, "She grabbed my sleeve like it was a handle and said, 'Please, sir, fast.' Not Mr. Sir?" Like she'd been practicing asking adults for big favors. Hank glanced toward the ridgeline. "Only family up there since the paper mill closed is the Marlowe place. House with a rusted roof that sings when the rain hits it. Folks say the older sister keeps to herself." He lowered his voice without meaning to. Keeps to herself can mean too many things. The name struck bone. Silas thanked them, promised coffee he could not afford yet, and slid into the Jeep. Valor leapt in after, a shadow of muscle and intent. The road climbed, the forest shouldering closer, draped in mist that softened the shape of everything, but didn't change the truth of it. When the gravel thinned to ruts, the house appeared, an old timber frame with a tin roof freckled brown with rust, a sagging porch, and a yard that had given up pretending to be a lawn. A wind-twisted maple leaned toward the eaves as if listening for secrets. On the porch rail sat a ceramic bird bath turned to an ashtray, and on the sill of the left window stood a small, simple frame. From the yard through rain-silvered glass, Silas could just make out the photograph. Lana, hair loose over one shoulder, smiling with that kindness that made other people confess things. The breath left him and returned as something heavier. He climbed the steps, knocked. Valor sat but bristled, gaze fixed past the door into deeper rooms. The woman who opened answered to the house. Candace Marlowe looked mid-30s, with chestnut hair scraped back and a face that would have been pretty if it had not been trained for withholding. Her eyes were the careful green of someone who has priced everything in a room before speaking. She wore a gray cardigan pilled at the elbows and jeans that had carried more winter than summer. The guarded lines around her mouth suggested long arguments with bills and longer ones with herself. She smelled faintly of lavender cleaner and cigarette smoke. "We're not buying," she said, already closing the door a fraction. Silas steadied his voice. Ma'am, I was in a wreck down by the ravine. 2 little girls helped save me. Pink dresses. I came to say thank you to them, or to whoever's looking after them." A shadow crossed her face, quick and mean as a crow cutting the sky. "There are no girls here," she said. "Just me." Valor rose, took 2 steps forward, and planted a paw on the threshold. His growl was not loud, but it had weight. He was looking past Candace into the dim hallway where a closed door sat at the end, paint chipped to bare wood where hands had worried it over years. Silas stood his ground, posture neutral, palms visible, the old training of de-escalation surfacing. "I don't want trouble," he said. "I want gratitude to land where it belongs." Candace's lip twitched, almost a smile, almost a snarl. "Funny how men with wrecked cars think they own the road," she said. "There are children in this world who know when to keep quiet. You should try it." She began to close the door. "May I ask one thing?" Silas said, the words out before he could stop them. He nodded toward the windowsill. "The photograph, the woman in it, her name is Lana, isn't it?" For a heartbeat, the room behind her seemed to tilt. Candace didn't turn to look. "Old picture," she said, voice flattening the way people do when they step onto a lie. "Belonged to the previous owner." "And the previous owner was your sister," Silas said, soft as rain. Silence grew its roots between them. Valor bumped Silas's thigh, then moved, swift, decisive past Candace's leg when she startled and turned her shoulder to block him. In 2 strides, he was at the end of the short hall, nose pressed to the bottom of the closed door. He sniffed, stiffened, and pawed once, twice, with a sharp bark that cracked the stillness like a dropped plate. From behind the door came a hush, then the tiny scrape of something dragged across the wooded chair leg, or the edge of a shoe. Candace recovered fast. "Get your animal out of my house," she hissed, grabbing for Valor's collar. She never got hold of it. Valor backed out on command, one word from Silas, and returned to sit at his side, but he never stopped staring at the door. "If there are girls in there," Silas said, keeping his voice a controlled hum, "I brought something for them." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper bag from the town kiosk. 2 brioche rolls dusted with sugar, bright as small suns against the gray day. "A thank you." Simple Candace's gaze flicked from the bag to the hall and back. The calculation in her eyes was almost audible. She cracked the door wider and accepted the bag with fingertips that did not tremble. "You've said your piece," she said. "We're done." The door shut. The bolt slid, clean and final. Silas stood on the porch with the rain ticking on the roof like a pocket watch measuring out a life. He did not pound or shout. Instead, he took a step to the window, shielding the glass with his palm against the glare. The little frame on the sill stared back. It wasn't a studio portrait, but something intimate, a candid taken on a day ordinary enough to be sacred. Lana in a cotton dress, a cardigan undone at the throat, one hand lifted mid-gesture, laughing at someone just outside the frame. That old wonder rose in him, and then, with it, a hardening clarity. This was Lana's house once, and nothing the world said or didn't say would make that untrue. He descended the steps, mud sucking at his boots. Valor paced 3 steps ahead, then turned, then paced again, restless as a question mark that refused to flatten into a period. At the edge of the yard under the leaning maple, Silas noticed the smallest scatter of pink thread caught in the bark, shimmering damp. He tucked a strand into his pocket like a relic and followed the fence line until it met the trees. There, pressed in the soft dirt, were footprints, 2 sets, small and close together, turned heel in as children do when they whisper to one another as they walk. He knelt, letting the rain cut clean lines on his face. Behind him, a pickup creaked past on the road and was gone. Somewhere up the ridge, a tin roof sang under the weather. "All right," he said to Valor, which was another way of saying it to himself. "We don't push the door today." He looked back at the house once more. In the window beyond the photograph, a shadow shifted, the brief outline of a small head and a pale hand. Then the curtain fell back into place. On the drive back toward town, the trees crowded in and then loosened, the world breathing with him. Valor settled on the seat, eyes never leaving the line where road met rain. Silas followed the map Nora had given him to a turnout above a narrow creek. He cut the engine and listened to the water talk to rock. He felt the letter in his pocket like a living thing. 8 years of duty, 8 years of silence. 1 afternoon of pink dresses and a dog who knew where the truth lived. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine Lana's voice not as echo, but as instruction. When he opened them, the decision had already been made. He would return, not as a battering ram, but as a witness who would not look away. he started the engine, headed for town, and the first phone he could trust. The morning after the encounter at the Marlowe house broke with a pale sky and a mist that refused to lift from the treetops. Silas rose early from the cot in the small room he had rented above the general store, the scent of pine soap and rain-soaked wood filling the air. Valor was already awake, standing at the window with ears pricked, amber eyes tracing the street below as if measuring the silence for dangers. Silas knew the dog's vigilance had saved him more than once. Out there, somewhere past the veil of damp forest, two children were living behind a locked door, and their aunt's brittle voice had tried too hard to sound unbothered. Later that morning, Silas walked to the far end of town, Valor padding beside him. They stopped at a weather-beaten cottage with ivy climbing its walls and a sagging porch that looked ready to surrender to gravity. This was the home of Mrs. O'Connell, a woman in her late 70s who had lived her entire life in the shadow of these ridges. She opened the door before Silas knocked, her sharp eyes peering out beneath a crown of white curls pinned with a brass hair clip. Her skin was weathered, lined like folded parchment, but her back was still straight. She wore a faded floral house dress under a thick cardigan, and her voice carried both kindness and a warning edge. "You're the soldier who nearly lost his life on the ridge," she said, inviting him in with a flick of her hand. Inside, the air smelled of chamomile and cedar. On the mantel above the hearth, a row of photographs in tarnished frames spoke of decades of family, though none of them recent. She poured him tea into mismatched cups, her hands steady despite the tremors that sometimes betrayed her age. When Silas asked about Lana Marlowe, Mrs. O'Connell's lips pressed into a line. She sat down opposite him, clasping her hands as if to hold her memories together. Lana was gentle, almost too gentle for this place. She carried beauty, but it was the kind that made other women uneasy, soft-spoken, wide-eyed, always giving. Men admired her, but it was her heart that betrayed her. Literally. She tapped her own chest. Congenital. Her mother died of the same. Lana never spoke of it until it was too late. Silas leaned forward, his knuckles white around the cup. And the children? Mrs. O'Connell's gaze softened, the sternness in her face loosening into sorrow. She bore twins, not long after you left. Two girls, identical as dawn and dusk. She loved them fiercely, though she was fading. She wrote letters every month, sometimes more, always addressed to you. She sent them through Candace, said her sister promised to get them to the post. Silas's throat tightened. I never saw a single one. The old woman nodded slowly, her expression darkened by long suspicion. Candace never liked you. Thought soldiers broke more than they mended. When Lana died, barely 2 months after the birth, Candace claimed the babies were hers to raise. Folks whispered, but no one challenged. You were far away. No husband, no father, no man to stake a claim. Just silence. The words struck Silas harder than shrapnel ever had. 8 years. The same span of time he had been wearing a uniform, fighting battles in deserts and mountains that meant nothing to the small lives hidden here. His daughters had grown without a father while he drilled, saluted, and survived. He pressed his fist against his mouth to keep the sound inside. Valor whined softly and placed his paw on Silas's knee, the dog's steady weight grounding him in the moment. Mrs. O'Connell lowered her voice, as if the walls themselves might betray her. Candace is strict to the point of cruelty. The girls rarely smile. I sometimes see them through the fence, sitting on the porch steps, quiet as carved wood. And when I call, Candace shuts the curtains. She hesitated, then added, I remember once Lana showed me a scarf she was knitting. She said, this will be theirs when I'm gone. He'll know it came from me. When I saw that scarf last year, it was in Candace's hand, not the children's. I knew then the letters weren't the only thing stolen. Silas left the house with the bitter taste of confirmation burning down his throat. The mist had thickened, turning the forest road into a tunnel of shifting gray. Valor walked closer than usual, brushing his leg with each step as if reminding him not to collapse beneath the weight of truth. That night, as he returned to the room above the store, the sense of being watched crawled along his skin. Valor bristled, ears swiveling. Near the alley that cut between the store and the post office, a shadow detached itself from the wall. The man who stepped forward was taller than most, his posture ramrod straight, his hair clipped short with military precision. His suit jacket hung loose, but the way his hand hovered near the inside pocket betrayed habits that never left soldiers. His face was angular, eyes pale and sharp, his jaw locked with the familiarity of command. "Silas," the man said, his voice flat as a report. "Didn't think I'd see you here." "Colton Briggs," Silas answered, tasting the name like rust. Colton had been his commanding officer once in Syria, back when orders came down like thunder and men carried them out whether or not they could stomach the cost. Briggs had always been ambitious, his authority wielded with a surgeon's cruelty. He was in his early 40s now, though the tightness of his face made him seem carved from stone rather than aged by time. Colton smirked, though it never reached his eyes. "You're poking where you shouldn't. Those girls? Not your concern. Best let sleeping dogs lie." Valor's growl rumbled deep, vibrating through the quiet street. Silas did not move, though his shoulders tightened. "Funny," he said evenly. "You always did like covering things up with pretty phrases." "What are you doing tied to Candace?" Briggs stepped closer, the faint cologne unable to mask the metallic tang of someone who still oiled a weapon daily. "She needed help, and I know how to arrange things. People talk, but money makes them forget. You dig deeper, Silas, and you'll find yourself at the bottom of another ravine. This town doesn't need a hero, it needs silence." Before Silas could reply, a soft sound carried from down the street, the creak of a gate. He turned his head just enough to glimpse two small figures slipping back toward the Marlowe house, their dresses catching the weak glow of a street lamp. Briggs's eyes followed his, narrowing with unspoken warning. Then Valor lunged forward, barking, not at Briggs but toward the edge of town. Another figure darted away into the shadows. A man in a hood crouched low, moving fast. He had been watching the twins, tracking their steps. Valor strained at the leash, his instincts sharpened to protect. Silas's jaw hardened. He knew Briggs's kind of threats, but this was different. This was pursuit, planned and deliberate. "Stay away from them," Silas said, voice low, almost shaking with controlled fury. "Or I won't stay away from you." Briggs tilted his head, his smile thin and venomous. "You'll regret this," he murmured before turning and vanishing into the mist, his footsteps swallowed by the wet night. Silas crouched, gripping Valor's ruff. The dog's chest heaved with the remains of the growl, but his eyes stayed fixed on the path where the hooded man had disappeared. They were not safe. The twins were not safe. And Candace was not the only threat. The weight of fatherhood, unclaimed and stolen, now pressed into him like armor. He rose, silent but resolute, knowing he would not walk away again. The courthouse in downtown Portland was a building of sharp corners and tall windows, its sandstone walls darkened by decades of rain. Silas stood on the steps one cool morning, his suit borrowed from a veteran outreach center, shoulders too broad for its seams, but posture steady nonetheless. Beside him, Valor sat with ears pricked, a living shadow who drew stares from passers-by. The German shepherd wore a simple leather collar, polished clean, his presence both reassuring and commanding. Behind Silas, in the company of Mrs. O'Connell, the twins clutched each other's hands, their pink dresses now hidden under matching fleece hoodies. Their faces were solemn, eyes wide with the unspoken fear of children about to watch their lives debated in front of strangers. Waiting inside was Harper Jensen, the attorney Silas had hired through a referral from a veterans' rights clinic. Jensen was in his late 30s, wiry but confident, with a face that bore the calm persistence of a man who had built a career out of challenging systems larger than himself. His brown hair was cut short, and a thin scar near his jawline spoke of some childhood accident he never mentioned. His style was meticulous navy suit, silver tie pin, shoes polished to a mirror finish. He had grown up in the outskirts of Salem, the son of a mechanic and a school librarian, and had worked his way through law school nights while supporting his younger siblings. That discipline had etched itself into his every motion. He shook Silas's hand firmly. "We have what we need," he said in a low voice. "DNA results, the letters from Lana, testimony from Mrs. O'Connell, and one more piece. I'll reveal it only when the time is right." The courtroom itself smelled faintly of varnish and old paper, the high ceiling echoing every shuffle of feet. The judge, a tall woman with iron gray hair named Judge Meredith Clark, presided with a gaze both compassionate and unyielding. At 55, she had a reputation for giving children's voices weight even when adults tried to drown them out. She wore her black robe as if it were armor against deceit. Candace sat at the defendant's table, lips pressed into a thin line, her green eyes darting nervously. She wore a black blouse with sharp shoulders, her hair pinned so tightly it looked painful. Across from her, Colton Briggs had taken a seat despite not being officially summoned, his presence looming like a storm cloud. In civilian clothes, he still radiated the rigidity of command, his hands folded, but his stare sharp and cold. The twins were seated with Mrs. O'Connell at the back. Valor lay at their feet, and every so often one of the girls would reach down to twine her fingers into his fur. When Candace glanced their way, her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Judge Clark opened proceedings. Jensen rose, his voice clear and measured, presenting first the DNA results clinical, undeniable numbers showing Silas to be the father. He laid the printed pages before the court clerk, then turned to the letters. One by one, he read lines from Lana's handwriting, fragile but steadfast, words of longing, of fear, of love for Silas and for the daughters he never knew. The courtroom grew hushed. Even the twins, too young to follow the legal terms, understood the weight of their mother's words. Tears shimmered in their wide eyes. Candace shifted uncomfortably, her composure fraying. She whispered something to her counsel, a local attorney more interested in pay than principle. Jensen pressed forward. The evidence proves my client is not only the biological father, but also the rightful guardian. The children have been denied knowledge of him, and worse, evidence suggests intentional deception. Candace's lawyer objected weakly, citing stability of current guardianship, but Judge Clark overruled. Jensen then glanced at Silas, received a small nod, and produced a small recorder from his briefcase. And now, Your Honor, the final piece. He pressed play. The static gave way to voices, Candace's, tight and frantic, and Colton's, calm and sharp. The recording, captured by Silas weeks before, revealed their conversation. Candace worrying about Silas digging too deep, Colton assuring her the accident on the ridge should have taken care of the problem. Colton's voice was unmistakable when he said, "If he keeps asking questions, we'll make sure he doesn't walk away again." The words rippled through the room like a stone in water. Candace's face went pale. Colton leaned forward, fury flashing in his pale eyes. "Fabricated," he barked, but the judge's gavel silenced him. In the back row, the twins pressed close to Valor. One girl wrapped both arms around his neck, hiding her face in his fur, while the other giggled nervously through tears when the dog licked her hand. The sound, small and fleeting, reached Silas like a lifeline. He straightened in his chair, hands steady, eyes locked on the judge. Jensen concluded, "This recording, alongside all other evidence, proves not only negligence, but deliberate endangerment. These children deserve safety. They deserve the father they were denied." Judge Clark's face was stern as she looked over the documents. Her gavel struck. Pending further investigation into the conduct of Candace Marlowe and Colton Briggs, custody of the minors is hereby transferred to their biological father, Silas Callahan, effective immediately. The room buzzed. Candace gasped, rising as if to protest, but security officers closed in, one hand on her arm. Colton stood, his jaw tight, his posture daring anyone to move against him, but he too was restrained and escorted out. Silas exhaled, the breath trembling. Behind him, the twins rushed forward. For the first time, they reached for his hands of their own accord, small fingers wrapping around his scarred knuckles. Valor rose, pressing against all three of them like a living shield, tail sweeping slowly as though sealing a vow. Silas bent down, whispering softly to the girls, though the courtroom noise swelled around them. "You're safe now, I promise." The sound of the gavel still echoed in Silas's ears when the courtroom doors swung open and the weight of the last hours gave way to something lighter, almost unreal. The corridor outside was filled with murmurs, the shuffle of papers, the heavy steps of officers leading Candace away in handcuffs. Her once cold composure had cracked. Her eyes were wide with panic, lips moving with half-swallowed protests no one cared to hear. Colton Briggs followed, his jaw set like a man who had lived his life believing no wall could contain him, now forced to march under the grip of two federal marshals. He kept his silence, but the fury in his pale eyes promised a reckoning that would never come. Silas stepped into the sunlight beyond the courthouse steps, the twins holding tightly to his hands. Their small fingers curled into his scarred knuckles, one girl pressing her face into his side as if afraid someone might pull her away, the other staring with wide-eyed wonder at the crowd of onlookers who had gathered. Valor walked ahead, his broad chest and raised tail a banner of triumph, the glint of pride in his amber eyes unmistakable. The dog stopped abruptly halfway down the steps, ears perked, gaze fixed on the arched window above. Silas followed his line of sight and froze. There, perched on the stone ledge, was a white sparrow. It was impossibly still against the shifting breeze, its small feathers shimmering like snowflakes caught in sunlight. For a heartbeat, Silas could almost hear Lana's voice, soft and lilting, telling him the old story she had whispered once on a quiet evening long ago. If you ever see a white sparrow, it means love is still watching. It means you're not alone. His throat tightened. The twins gasped in unison, squeezing his hands. "Daddy, look!" one of them whispered, her voice trembling with awe. The sparrow tilted its head, lingered as if to be certain they had seen, and then lifted into the air. Its wings beat once, twice before it disappeared into the blue horizon. Silas bowed his head, whispering without sound, "Thank you, Lana." Days later, after the storm of legal papers and signatures, after the media glare dimmed, life began to settle into something resembling peace. Silas found a small house on the edge of Portland, tucked near the forest line where pine trees framed the horizon and the ground sloped into wild meadows. The house was nothing grand. 2 bedrooms, a narrow porch, and a roof that creaked when it rained, but it was theirs. He painted the door a deep blue, the twins' favorite color, and built a small wooden swing in the yard where they could sit side by side. The mornings became rituals of healing. At sunrise, Silas brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead while Valor bounded across the yard, nose to the ground, chasing scents with a joy that only animals untouched by human burdens knew. Inside, the twins tumbled out of their shared room, hair tangled, their pink dresses replaced now with school clothes that smelled faintly of laundry soap. They laughed when Silas tried to braid their hair, his soldier's hands clumsy but learning. He tied their shoelaces with the same precision he once tied knots on field gear. Only now his purpose was gentler, ensuring his daughters would run freely, not march into battle. The girls, Ava and Lily, names he spoke softly each night, like prayers rediscovered, began to bloom. Ava, the elder by 2 minutes, carried a seriousness beyond her years, her hazel eyes often fixed on Silas with searching intensity, as if she were still testing whether his presence was permanent. She liked to draw birds, especially sparrows, filling sketchbooks with winged shapes that seemed to hover off the page. Lily, lighter in spirit, giggled often, her laughter like bells across the yard. She clung to Valor more than her sister, curling against his side at night. Her tiny arms looped around his thick fur as if he were her shield against the world. One evening, Mrs. O'Connell visited, leaning on her wooden cane, but walking with the dignity of a matriarch. She carried a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "I kept this," she said, her voice catching, "because I thought one day it might find its way back." Inside lay the silver scarf Lana had knitted, frayed at the edges but intact, the stitches uneven yet tender. Silas framed it beneath glass and hung it in the twins' room above their small beds. The girls traced the threads with reverent fingers. "It's from Mommy," Ava whispered. Silas nodded, his chest heavy with a mixture of grief and gratitude. That scarf became a beacon, a thread tying the past to the present, reminding them all that Lana's love had not vanished. It had simply transformed into memory and legacy. The community, once wary, began to accept them. Harper Jensen visited often, sometimes staying for dinner, bringing law journals he pretended to read while the twins braided his tie into knots. Judge Clark, having seen too many families break, sent a quiet note after the ruling. "May this home remain whole." Even Nora Bell, the nurse who had first treated Silas after the crash, came by with jars of homemade preserves, saying only, "Healing doesn't stop at the hospital door." Yet shadows still lingered. At night, when the forest winds whistled through the eaves, Silas sometimes sat awake, Valor lying at his feet, his hand resting on the dog's head. The memories of Colton's threats and the narrow escape from the ravine haunted him. But each time he looked across the hall at the twins sleeping soundly beneath the silver scarf, he knew why he had survived. He was not just a soldier anymore. He was a father. One Saturday, as the sun spilled gold across the meadow, Silas sat on the porch with Ava and Lily beside him, Valor stretched out at their feet. The twins argued cheerfully about who would get the first turn on the swing. Silas leaned back, the wood creaking under his weight, and let himself smile. The scars on his body and soul remained, but they no longer defined him. They were simply reminders of the distance he had traveled to arrive at this moment. "Daddy," Lily asked, her voice thoughtful, "do you think Mommy is happy?" Silas looked at the framed scarf visible through the open window, at the sparrows darting across the sky. He rested a hand on each daughter's shoulder. "I think she's watching," he said softly, "and I think she's proud." Valor lifted his head, barked once into the stillness, as if seconding the truth of those words. The white sparrow did not return that day, but Silas no longer needed proof. He had found it in Ava's determined gaze, in Lily's laughter, in the steady heartbeat of a dog who had never once left his side. The family was not whole in the way it had once been, but it was reborn, stitched together by loss, defended by loyalty, and guided by love. When Silas walked out of the courthouse that day, with his daughter's small hands clinging to his and Valor at his side, it was more than a legal victory. It was the rebirth of a family. What began as pain and betrayal had become proof that love, truth, and loyalty can outlast even the darkest lies. The white sparrow above the courthouse reminded him, and us, that the ones we lose never truly leave. They live on in the bonds we choose to protect. If this story touched your heart, share in the comments. What does family mean to you, and who has been your Valor, the one who never leaves your side? And if you believe in the power of love, loyalty, and second chances, don't forget to like this video and follow our channel so you never miss the next story.